Welcome to the Badge Tales. My name is Thomas Reed. I'm 65 years old now, and I've been retired from the force for 14 years. People think retirement is a clean ending, like you hang up the uniform, turn in your badge, and the rest of your life becomes quieter by choice. They picture fishing, grandkids, morning walks, and maybe the occasional story at a barbecue that makes everyone laugh. Retirement does bring quiet, but it doesn't always bring peace. The job leaves marks you can't see. And the strangest part is that the memories that stay aren't always the big ones. You'd think it would be the shootings, the wrecks, the screaming calls where your heart feels like it's trying to punch its way out of your chest. Sometimes it's a porch light, sometimes it's a door you didn't open. Some nights I lie awake and think about a call that didn't make the news. It didn't earn a medal or a reprimand. It was the kind of call you clear and forget, the kind you might not even mention in a weekly summary. Except I didn't forget it. 14 years retired, and I still think about it. Not because I want to, because something inside me refuses to let it be filed away. Most mornings now I wake up early out of a habit. The sun isn't even up yet, and I'm already in the kitchen listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock I swore I'd fix years ago. I make coffee the way I always have. Strong, too strong for most people. Old habits. I take my mug to the window and watch the neighborhood come alive. A teenager drags a trash bin to the curb with the kind of anger only a teenager can carry. A man in a suit rushes to his car, already on the phone, already late for something. A mother holds her kid's backpack strap like she's afraid the world will steal him away in the time it takes to blink. That's when the thinking starts. The mind has its own patrol route. It circles the old streets. It checks the old corners. It revisits the same scene again and again, like it's still searching for something it missed. I wore a badge for 35 years. Not because I wanted power, not because I wanted attention. I wore it because when I was young, I believed showing up mattered. I believed being there could change the outcome. You learn quickly, though. You learn you can do everything right and still lose. You learn that outcome is a word people use when they want to pretend life follows rules. But the call I keep thinking about is different, because I wasn't beaten by chaos. I was beaten by hesitation. I was 41 then, mid-career, a solid reputation. I wasn't reckless, and I wasn't lazy. I'd been around long enough to have my instincts sharpened. I'd also been around long enough to know that kicking down a door isn't a small decision. People forget that part. Movies make it look like cops smash into houses and shrug at the damage. In real life, you break a door, you break trust, you break someone's sense of safety. Even if you're right, you leave a scar behind. So that night, I stood on a porch and tried to be careful. The call came in just before shift change. Welfare check, elderly male. Neighbors hadn't seen him in 3 days. Mail piling up. No prior calls at the address, no history. Dispatch sounded calm, no urgency in her voice. Those are the calls that hide teeth. I drove over in my patrol car, heater blowing, radio low. It was late fall, cold enough that the air felt sharp in your lungs. The street was quiet, not empty, just quiet. A few porch lights on, a couple of cars parked along the curb. Leaves gathered in piles like the whole neighborhood had given up on keeping things tidy. The house was small and brick, single story with a porch that sagged just a little. The porch light flickered on and off like it was thinking about quitting. the kind of light that makes shadows look like movement. I parked at the curb and sat for a moment. Not fear, just habit. I'd learned that a moment of stillness can tell you more than rushing ever will. You listen, you look, you let your senses catch up. No sound except wind in the trees. I stepped out, pulled my jacket tighter, and walked up the path. Leaves crunched under my boots. That sound always felt louder at night. I knocked and announced myself. "Police department. Sir, are you home?" I waited, counted in my head. Nothing. I knocked again, louder. Knuckles stinging a little on the wood. Still nothing. I tried the door handle. Locked. I radioed my location, noted the lack of response, and told dispatch I was going to check the perimeter. I walked around the house, flashlight sweeping. The windows were covered with curtains. One window had a thin gap where a weak light spilled out, yellow and tired. No signs of forced entry, no broken glass, no obvious emergency. That's what fooled me. That's what made me think, maybe it's nothing. I circled back to the front, knocked again. No movement, no voice. I stood on that porch with the cold in my face and the weight of decision in my hands. Policy gave us options. Welfare check calls often do. You can force entry if you have reasonable belief someone inside needs help. You can also clear it if you have no clear signs and plan a follow-up. The problem is, reasonable belief isn't a number. It isn't a red light or a siren. It's a feeling, and feelings can be wrong. I told myself the neighbors might be overreacting. I told myself he might be with family. I told myself he might be asleep, hard of hearing. I told myself I didn't smell gas or smoke. I told myself there was no screaming, no banging, no obvious crisis. I told myself a lot of things, and I made the choice not to force the door. I cleared the call with a note. Unable to contact. No signs of distress observed. Recommend follow-up. Then I drove away and let the next calls fill my head. A traffic stop. A noise complaint. A domestic argument that ended with two people shouting different versions of the same heartbreak. Days passed. A shift became another shift. I forgot the address. Or thought I did. 2 days later, another unit was dispatched back to the same house. Neighbors more worried now. Mail still piled up. No movement. This time they forced entry. The man was inside, collapsed on the kitchen floor. Cold. Not old cold. Death cold. I got the update in the middle of paperwork. Someone said it casually, like it was just another line in a report. Welfare check on Maple Street. He was down. Looks like he'd been there a while. Maple Street. My chest tightened. I remember the pen in my hand, frozen above the page. I asked who the responding officer was. I asked what time they found him. I asked questions I already knew the answers to. They said stroke. Possible survival if found earlier. Possible. There's that word again. Possible. It was like someone planted a nail in my brain and tapped it just enough to hurt. The department did what departments do. They reviewed the call. They looked at my notes. They checked policy. They checked if there were signs I missed or procedures I ignored. They cleared me. No violation, no discipline. On paper, I did it right. But here's what no policy manual teaches you. Paper doesn't sit with you in the dark. I went to the funeral, not in uniform, not as an officer, just as a man who couldn't stay away. It was a small service. A simple church with wooden pews and a smell of old hymn books. A few people scattered around. A woman in her 60s clutching tissues like she was afraid of dropping them. A younger man who looked exhausted, eyes red but dry, like he'd cried enough already. I stood in the back. Quiet. Anonymous. His name was Harold Bennett. That was the first time I learned it. The pastor talked about a life of modest routines. Harold liked crossword puzzles. Harold loved old Western movies. Harold fixed things for neighbors when he was younger. Harold kept to himself but always waved. They didn't talk about loneliness, but it hung in the air. The kind of loneliness that ends with someone not being seen for days. I watched them lower the casket later at the cemetery. The wind cut across the open field and the trees made a sound like whispering. I wanted to tell someone I was sorry, but I didn't know who deserved that apology. I didn't even know if it would help or just make their grief messier. So I stayed silent. After that, I changed. Not overnight, not dramatically. Quietly, the way people do when a weight settles into their bones. I knocked longer on doors. I asked one more question. I took welfare checks personally in a way I hadn't before, and sometimes I overcorrected. I forced entry on calls where maybe it wasn't necessary. I broke locks. I paid for repairs out of my own pocket more than once. I wrote reports that took longer, explaining my reasoning, trying to protect myself from the feeling of what if. My partners noticed. One of them, a good man, asked me once why I was so stubborn about doors. We were sitting in the patrol car, engine idling, waiting for another call. I looked out through the windshield like the answer was written on the street. I said, "Just a case that stuck with me," and he nodded like he understood. He didn't, not fully, not the way you can't understand until you carry it. Years went by. I made sergeant. I trained rookies. I watched young officers show up with that same belief I once had, the belief that the right decision will always reveal itself if you're smart enough, brave enough, experienced enough. Sometimes I let them believe it for a while. Hope is a tool, too. It keeps you moving. But I also tried to teach them something else. I told them that hesitation can be dangerous, and action can be dangerous, and your job is to choose which danger you can live with. I told them that the public sees the result and assumes the path was obvious. It almost never is. I never told them about Harold Bennett by name. I couldn't, because then it would become a warning story, a lesson, and part of me felt like reducing him to a lesson was another way of failing him, so I carried it alone. When retirement finally came, the department threw a little party in the break room. It was the usual: cake with too much frosting, a plaque with my name engraved, handshakes, jokes about finally sleeping in. Someone gave a speech about dedication, about the thin line, about service. I smiled, I thanked them, I made the right faces at the right moments. Inside I felt something else. A strange emptiness, like I had been sprinting for decades, and the moment I stopped, the weight of everything I'd been outrunning caught up. The first year of retirement was the hardest. Not because I missed the job. I didn't miss the radio noise. I didn't miss the paperwork. I didn't miss the way your stomach tightens when you're driving fast and you don't know what you're arriving to. What I missed, unexpectedly, was purpose. On the job, even the boring days had a reason. In retirement, days can blur together. You wake up, you eat, you run errands, you watch the news, you go to bed. And in that blur, memories find space. That's when Harold's porch light started showing up again. Not every night, but enough. I'd be half asleep and suddenly I'm back on that porch. The cold air, the flickering light, my hand on the doorframe. The moment where I decided, not tonight. And then I'd wake up with my heart pounding like I'd just chased someone on foot. At first I tried to fight it. I told myself it was pointless. Past is past. It's been reviewed. I was cleared. I was a good cop. I did my best. But the mind doesn't care about clearance. So I started doing what cops do. I started investigating my own memory. I replayed the scene. What did I see? What did I miss? What signs could have told me more? Could I have heard something if I'd leaned closer? Could I have seen movement behind the curtain? Could I have noticed the male more clearly? Could I have asked neighbors more questions? Could I have? It's endless. And then one day, about 5 years into retirement, I was at a hardware store, just buying a new lock for my back gate. Ordinary, the kind of errand that fills your day in retirement and makes you feel useful. At the checkout, an old man ahead of me struggled with his wallet. His hands trembled, and his face got red with embarrassment. A younger cashier tried to act patient, but impatience leaked through anyway. The man finally got the cash out, dropped a coin, and knelt down slowly to pick it up. Nobody moved to help him. I stepped forward without thinking, picked up the coin, handed it back, and the old man looked at me with such relief it felt like a punch. He said, "Thank you. I hate feeling like I'm in the way." I don't know why, but Harold flashed through my mind right then. Not the porch light, not the door, just the idea of an older man alone, struggling, invisible until it was too late. I walked out of that store and sat in my car for a long time. That's when something shifted for me. I realized I'd been punishing myself by reliving the moment, hoping pain would turn into a different outcome. It won't. So instead, I started doing something quieter. I started checking in on people, not like a cop, like a neighbor, like a human being. An older couple down the street started getting their trash out late. I offered to take it out for them. I framed it as friendly. They accepted, and I kept doing it even when they insisted they were fine. A widower on my block, a man who used to sit on his porch with a radio playing old songs, stopped coming out. I knocked on his door, told him I was just making sure he was okay. He laughed, said he'd been sick with the flu, and thanked me for checking. It wasn't heroic, but it was something. It was a way of honoring the lesson without making it a punishment. 14 years retired, that's what I've learned. You don't always get closure. Sometimes all you get is a chance to live differently because of what happened. Still, there are nights when Harold returns. Sometimes it happens when I'm watching a movie and a character collapses alone. Sometimes it happens when I see a news story about someone found days later in an apartment. Sometimes it happens for no reason at all. On those nights, I don't fight it anymore. I let the memory sit beside me like an old partner, uncomfortable, quiet, persistent. I talk to it in my head. I tell Harold I'm sorry. I tell him I didn't want to damage his door. I tell him I wanted to do the right thing. I tell him the truth, which is that I was trying to be careful and ended up being wrong. And then I remind myself of something that took me years to accept. One decision doesn't erase a career. It doesn't erase the people you did help. It doesn't erase the nights you ran toward danger so someone else didn't have to. But it does matter, because one decision can teach you more than 100 routine ones ever will. If I could step back onto that porch, knowing what I know now, I would force entry. I would take the complaint. I would take the angry family member yelling at me for breaking a lock. I would take the supervisor's lecture about property damage. I would take all of it. Because the worst paperwork in the world is still lighter than the thought of a man dying alone when help was standing outside. That's what I mean when I say I still think about this. It's not a ghost story. It's not a horror story. It's not even a tragedy in the way people expect. It's a story about a moment When I chose the safe path and learned that safe is sometimes just fear wearing a clean shirt. I've been retired 14 years, 65 years old. I'm slower now, softer around the middle. I forget where I put my keys sometimes. I groan when I stand. But I still remember that porch like it was yesterday, and I carry it into the quiet parts of my life, because the quiet parts are where it belongs. The job taught me laws, tactics, procedures. Harold Bennett taught me something else. He taught me that showing up isn't just arriving. It's deciding to act when it would be easier not to. It's understanding that the cost of being wrong can be measured in more than money or complaints. Sometimes it's measured in hours on a kitchen floor. I don't know if Harold had family close by. I don't know if he had regrets. I don't know what his last conscious thoughts were. I try not to imagine. Imagination can be cruel. What I do know is this. I was there, and I left. And that's why, 14 years later, I still think about it. Please like, share, and subscribe for more tales from behind the badge.